Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about toxic parents. And I'm not talking like toxic parenting with a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 17-year-old. I'm not talking about lawnmower parenting or helicopter parenting. Those are all great topics for another day. I'm talking about what do you do if you're 45 and you realize my dad is toxic? What do you do if you're 50 and you realize my mom, my 70-year-old mom, is toxic and she's bringing destruction to my family? How do you operate in that reality, knowing that your time with them is short? This is a question that I'm asked the most often, I think, via email or in person or with clients. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to the Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right. Hello. I hope your day is going well, wherever it is and whatever you're doing. I hope that you're enjoying the day. We're going to spend a little bit of time here and circle back to constructs. A few weeks ago, I talked about how constructs help us understand our world. They shape the world around us. They don't shape the world around us, but they do shape our understanding of the world. They're very similar to mental models, and I reference that edition. And a couple people wrote in and they were like, hey, I don't actually think I have mental models. I just kind of, go through the day. And one lady wrote in, she was like, I have my faith, and that is my construct. And so I would actually agree with her that her faith probably is the biggest shaper of her constructs, and that we could certainly probably draw a straight line from her faith to her constructs. Where she and I would diverge, and I know this because she told me in the email, is it's still worth questioning what's going on. It's still worth questioning whatever it is that you are, that you do, right? I was just thinking about this today, and I was talking to someone recently, and we had talked about a news article, and immediately after that person, I talked to someone else who also brought the news article up. Now, the fascinating point to me was that they were both they're both using very different constructs to understand that. And so the first person, their construct, it was a news article about a political figure, and their construct, basically, that political figure is a victim. The second person, that political figure deserves to be in jail because that media publication is very trustworthy and what they're telling me is true. And so those are constructs. I have a construct, me personally, that I don't trust much media without investigating it. I think that media has given up a long time ago its idea of being objective, whether it's conservative media or liberal media or in the middle media or non-religious media or religious media. I'm always amazed at how many different types of media there are that try to advertise for me to sign up for their newsletter. But I have that construct. I went and watched a soccer game last week, and the teams that were playing just didn't like the outside of the field. If you're a soccer player or coach, you know you need to spread the field. They were not spreading the field. That's a construct, and it's a construct that has been questioned and tested. And constructs have value because they help us understand our world, but truly valuable constructs will be ones that have been questioned and tested and are open for retesting. And one of the reasons that this often becomes a problem is because we then have to face the reality that this is a lot more work than I want it to be. And as a guy in one of my men's groups once said, I feel like things should get easier. And when they don't, I get frustrated. That would actually be a great podcast topic, wouldn't it? So, if you had questions about constructs, all they are is how you sort out your world. It's how I sort out my world. To truly have value, to truly have good value, we have to question them, right? Like I have constructs around medicine and my field. I'm reading a book right now. In fact, I'm reading a bunch of books right now, but I'm reading a book right now about sex and making sex better. And it's clear that the author of that book and I do not have the same constructs about certain things. And it's also clear that we do have the same constructs about many other things. I would argue that constructs and mental models are what make our worldview. And so, like, if you watch the news, just check yourself for your internal response. That's probably driven by your construct. If you listen to the news, if someone brings up sports, if someone talks about something and you immediately feel a strong reaction in yourself, find the gap between hearing that thing and the strong reaction, and you have a construct there. And that can help you. For instance, let's say that you find yourself regularly being frustrated with your kids. Ask yourself, what's the construct that's going on? Maybe it's one that you need to change. Maybe it's one that you need to hang on to and control and help your kids change whatever behavior it is that's driving you nuts. That's the difficulty in how you run things out, is what do you do with your constructs, which I'm going to use to switch over to our topic today, because I've also had a lot of people write in, and if you've been following my blog, which you can find at joemartino.com, if you want to have it emailed directly to you, you can have it sent directly to your email inbox by going to iamjoemartino.substack.com. And every time I post, it'll be posted on my website, which you can read at your leisure, or it'll come straight to you. But I have a lot of people writing into me about toxic parents, right? And I'm not talking about, like, I get a few emails a year, maybe people reach out to me once or twice a year about, hey, my husband, my wife, I feel like the things that they're doing are toxic. And that's probably another conversation. But one of the things that I hear a lot about are people who are adults with toxic parents. What do I do with them? How do I handle my parents who are adults who are, quite honestly, toxic? Sometimes it's worse. They are abusive. You know, what is it that I should do? Because I don't want to just cut them out, but sometimes I feel like I have to. When I do have boundaries, my dad, my mom, they do things that I find to be manipulative, or I feel like they're trying to manipulate me, or they are straight up trying to manipulate me. And there's a lot of rub here. In fact, somebody wrote in, they read my book review of Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier. Does not live in my head for free anymore. I've not thought about it until that email came in. But she did. She wrote in, and she was very disturbed by the chapter that talks about disconnecting from your parents, because in the book, Miss Schreier, or Mrs. Schreier, I assume she's married, states that, you know, that is terrible. And she acts as though there's no such thing as adult toxic parents. And so she wrote me in, and she was like, so I understand you didn't like the book, but what do I do? I had another guy write in, another person wrote in that was a guy, and he had seen a meme or something on Instagram. I've actually seen it. I'm not sure what you would call it, because I don't think it's quite a meme. It's actually a video. It doesn't matter. A reel. And the reel has this, like, deep voice that comes on, and it makes the statement, remember, your father is the only human who will ever want for you to do better than him. Right? And it's this, you know, and there's probably a lot of truth. There's probably a lot of dads that really want their kids to do better than them. My wife and I were just talking with friends this past week, and we were talking about, you know, businesses and how they work. And, you know, a lot of times business owners, one of their objectives is they're trying to set their children up to have a better life, or be better financially set for life than they were when they were younger. But this guy writes in and he says to me, but that's not my dad. What do I do with that? And this is a problem that is facing a lot of adults in our world today, is their parents are not good parents. And we're talking somebody who's 40 and his parents are 65. We're talking someone who is 50 and her parents are in their 70s or 60s. In other words, I'm talking about adults that are in midlife and they realize, my parents aren't good parents. My mom isn't a good mom. My dad isn't a good dad. What do I do with that? And so today, that's what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, is what do you do when you're an adult and you have adult parents that are toxic? And the obvious problem with this is that everyone who has parents that are elderly knows that the day is coming when you're not going to have them anymore. You're not going to have time with them. And so they feel caught, right? Because, I mean, I talk to people all the time. They're like, look, my mom, my dad, I was thinking about one guy I was talking to. He's like, my dad is just absolutely toxic, but he's 74. And I don't know what to do with that because like I try to talk to him, but he insults my wife. He insults my kids. He tells my son that he's fat and slow. And he's like, "Arr." And I don't know what to do with it because it's just mean. So what do I do? And that's what we want to talk about today, because those complications don't take away the very real pain, trauma, and damage that a toxic parent can do. So because of this reality, the very first thing that we do is we acknowledge what's going on. And this is perhaps one of the greatest temptations of my clients, is they want to deny exactly how toxic their father is, exactly how toxic their mother is. They want to maybe not look too hard at the effects of that. They want to maybe not take quite as hard a look at what's going on with their children because of their interactions with their parents. And I get it. They're trying to balance teaching their kids like, you fight for family. You contend for those relationships. You grapple for those relationships. But at some point, there comes this moment where you have to say, okay, but you're not willing, or you don't seem willing to stop doing certain things. And so we have to draw a boundary here. But drawing that boundary starts with recognizing what is going on. So that's the first step. We recognize what's going on and we admit it, and we admit the impacts of it. Once you can admit what's going on, then you can take your space to set some ideas on what the boundaries are that you're going to be trying to run out. What are the boundaries that you're going to be trying to set? And it might, these can take on a host of things. They could be as severe as, hey, I'm cutting this parent out of my life. And certainly there are people that do that and they cut off all communication. That has come under a lot of attack lately from, really all sides, but especially my conservative friend sides have really gone after that. In part because there certainly does seem to be a movement of cutting off all ties over some things that are rather strange to me. But, these things, you have to set boundaries. Once you realize, hey, there is a level of toxicity here, there is a level of pain here, and there are really negative outcomes for that, you have to be willing and able to go ahead and then just draw boundaries. And the boundaries might be, we only talk for a certain amount of time. Maybe you only talk on the phone. Maybe you only go visit your parent once in a while. Maybe they're not allowed to come to your house. And I know that this is where things get very dicey for a lot of people, but maybe those are some of the boundaries that you need to put in place. But once you know what's going on, the second step is you have to set boundaries for how you're going to interact with the person. Otherwise, you're just going to let these bad things continue. Now, a few quick words about boundaries. Boundaries are not for us or for the other person. They're for us, right? Boundaries are for how we interact with other people. That's really important. If you don't agree with that or don't remember that, I actually did a podcast episode on that where I talked about that boundaries are for us, not for other people. And I'm actually typing in right now as we talk. I'm trying to look up that episode. Let's see what comes up when I Google it. 244, episode 244 is the episode that you're looking for. What are boundaries and how do they work for us? There's also some videos there that you could look up. I would encourage you to really ponder that, because your boundaries are for how you're going to interact with the other person, not how they're going to interact with you. You're inviting them to act in a certain way. And so that brings up two things. You have to have a talk with them. And this is one of the things that can be the most difficult. You have to explain to them what you're doing. You have to explain to them your boundaries. And let's be honest, most toxic people, especially if you have a parent that is either borderline or narcissistic personality disorder, they're going to blame you. They're going to deny anything that they've done. They're going to try to minimize it. They're going to tell you that what you're saying is wrong. They're going to tell you that they try. They're probably going to attack you. And if you're 45, 40, 50, you know this because you've grown up with this. You've watched it happen. But you still have to have that conversation with them. And in that conversation, we want to explain to them what's going on. Why are you drawing boundaries? Especially if you're withdrawing. Because look, if they have NPD or they're borderline, they're going to feel you pulling away and they're going to try to suck you back in. They're going to improve their behaviors for about 2 weeks. They're going to do everything you ever asked them to do and they didn't do. They're going to do it for about 10 days. They're going to come hard to get you back into a system that they understand. They're going to come with full force trying to bring you in to the world that they control. Because that's how this works. That's what makes it toxic. So if you ask them in the past to call you, they're going to start calling you. If you ask them in the past to not crack jokes about your spouse, they're going to stop cracking jokes about your spouse. If you ask them, right, the one situation where the guy's dad called his son fat and slow or something, he went and apologized and then did it again literally 2 weeks later. But for those 2 weeks, life was golden. And so you have to explain to them what's going on. You have to offer them, you don't have to, but I would encourage you to offer them a way forward. Offer them a way forward, right? Most of the time, at least for most people I talk to, the hope is that they can have a good relationship with their parent, but they can't have a good and healthy relationship with their parent with the behaviors that are currently going on. And so you have to talk about what is the path forward. So the first thing is we admit what's going on. The second thing is we set boundaries. The third thing is we enforce those boundaries. And that's where it gets really difficult because there's a loneliness that follows. Now, most of the time, not only is there a loneliness, but for the person enforcing boundaries, there's a sense of guilt. And that's something that you really have to be aware of, that it's coming. When you set boundaries, especially with a toxic parent or maybe a toxic sibling, there's going to be guilt and loneliness. So one of the things that we actually have to do is we have to prepare ourselves for that guilt and loneliness. We have to prepare for it to be rough. We have to prepare for the process to be difficult. Because if your parent or sibling is truly toxic, they're going to push on that. They're going to come for the drama. And it's going to be hard. And you're going to grieve, and that's okay. You're going to be sad, and that's okay. You're going to feel terrible some days because the clock is ticking for all of us. I just heard of a guy who passed away in his sleep, really fit guy, great guy, very gregarious, had a career that he loved, and he passed away in his sleep, went to sleep and never woke up at like 50 or 48. I don't know. I've heard two different ages. I've heard 51 and I've heard 48. So I split the difference and say 50, 49 and a half. But what do you do with that? We all know that the time's coming. We all know that our time with our parents is fleeting. And because we know it's fleeting, you have to prepare yourself for the reality that you're going to grieve this. It's going to feel sad because sooner or later that parent is going to pass, and the time to make it right, the time to restore the relationship will be over. There will be no more attempts. But that doesn't mean you keep running back into a fire and getting burnt. And so as you chase this, you have to expect for it to be rough. You have to prepare yourself for that. Allow yourself space to grieve it. Allow yourself space to feel badly about it. But then remember, and this is the sixth step, you can do this. You have to do this. Building healthy relationships requires boundaries. Just because they're your parent doesn't mean you have to take abuse from them. And in some cases, like I've even met people where their adult parent still strikes them as adults. It's insane to me. Still steals money from them. It's insane to me. You have to live in the tension. Remember, we talked about in a past episode, we talked about paddling the canoe on both sides. You have to live in the tension of wanting the relationship to work and realizing that you can't completely control whether or not it works. You have to rely on the other person's effort at some level. And if they're not willing to put that effort in, you probably have to draw boundaries, and that's going to be difficult. You're going to grieve that, and that's okay. It's just really painful. And then I would say the one thing you have to consider is you have to decide, what does it look like to offer an olive branch, to offer a way forward, but to still have those boundaries. And this is where people tend to get in trouble. Like I had a client one time who was like, I'm just done doing holidays with my mom and dad. There's yelling and screaming and they're hollering at people. And it's not worth the 3 minutes. This client's words, not mine. It's not worth the 3 minutes of enjoyment, of decent memories that comes from it. And so we talked that out, and I said, okay, well, then just stop. So they did, and they went through one full cycle of holidays. And then in the next cycle of holidays, the parents talked them into coming over for, I think, Easter. And it was right back to where it was, right? It was just the same thing. And he's like, so I feel like I failed. And I said to him, I said, did you fail, or did you try to offer an olive branch forward? They took it and it didn't go well. So now you have to readjust again and go back, right? Like it's the whole thing. Did it not work, or were we just not willing to fail enough for it to work? That's kind of where we get stuck sometimes. And so, look, this is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. You're going to feel guilt. There's 1,000,001 books out on this topic. Most of them have themes that follow each other. Some of them tell you, just cut your parents out. I personally am not always an advocate of that. I think there has to be boundaries, but the complete cutoff, it seems to me like, okay, well then there's no hope for restoration. But there does have to be space for restoration and new boundaries. All right, so tell me what you guys do, what works for you. What did you think of this episode? Send me an email, joe@joemartino.com. You can also reach us, probably a little bit more responsive, marketing@joemartino.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please put podcast in the subject line. Also, share this with 3 of your friends if you would. We find value in sharing things that we find valuable. All right, thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.